I'm Stephen, and I'm reading Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. This is the Barnes& Noble Classics edition. It has some chapter notes, footnotes, and whatnot, and I may at various times reference those. They help give a better context for the world in which Mary lived when she was writing this, and the life that she lived during that time. The We're up to chapter 8 now. The way I like to do it is I read a chapter, maybe two. I don't read all of it aloud. I get a scratchy throat and I'm not very comfortable reading aloud anyway, but I will read some passages aloud and I'll make some commentary here and there about the book and about things that are happening in it. Now, just to catch you up a bit, Victor Frankenstein is the protagonist. He's telling this story as if, he's at the end of his life looking back on it, telling it as a cautionary tale to a friend of his. And at this point in the story, he's just learned that his younger brother is dead. He believes that the creature is responsible for it, but at this point, he's the only person who knows of the creature, so he can't very well come out and tell everybody about his suspicions without having to do a lot of explaining first. So, so people think it's actually this maid who lived with them who was treated like a member of the family, Justine. People think that she's the one who killed William because, I don't know, jealousy or something like that. She was found with something that William had on him when he went missing, and when they found him, he didn't have it with him, but she did. It was a picture of William's mother. She loved, Mrs. Frankenstein. So they think it was jealousy. But Victor has promised that he's going to prove Justine's innocence one way or another. So that's where we are. Chapter 8. They're waiting for the trial to commence. Victor, his father, his mother's dead, by the way, but the rest of the family is there. He talks about the kind of torture that he's in watching all this because obviously since he created the creature, he feels responsible, and now he has to watch somebody that he cares about be accused of the crime and put on trial for it. He doesn't know how to tell people about it without appearing like the ravings of a madman, he says, and that even if he did admit it, nobody would believe him, and Justine would probably be executed anyway. A lot of circumstantial evidence is being presented. When it's Justine's chance to defend herself. Sometimes she struggled with her tears, but when she was desired to plead, she collected her powers and spoke in an audible, although variable voice. God knows how entirely I am innocent. But I do not pretend that my protestations should acquit me. I rest my innocence on a plain and simple explanation of the facts which have been adduced against me. And I hope the character I have always borne will incline my judges to a favorable interpretation, where any circumstance appears doubtful or suspicious. She then related that by permission of Elizabeth she had passed the evening of the night on which the murder had been committed at the house of an aunt at Cheyne, a village situated about a league from Geneva. On her return, at about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked her if she had seen anything of the child who was lost. She was alarmed by this account, and had passed several hours in looking for him, when the gates of Geneva were shut, and she was forced to remain several hours of the night in a barn belonging to a cottage, being unwilling to call up the inhabitants to whom she was well known. Most of the night she spent here watching. Towards morning she believed that she slept for a few minutes. Some steps disturbed her and she awoke. It was dawn, and she quitted her asylum, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. If she had gone near the spot where his body lay, it was without her knowledge. That she had been bewildered when questioned by the market woman was not surprising, since she had passed a sleepless night, and the fate of poor William was yet uncertain. Concerning the picture, she could give no account. I know how heavily and fatally this one circumstance weighs against me, but I have no power of explaining it, and when I have expressed my utter ignorance, I am only left to conjecture concerning the probabilities by which it might have been placed in my pocket. But here also I am checked. I believe that I have no enemy on earth, and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the murderer place it there? I know of no opportunity afforded him for so doing. For if I had, why should he have stolen the jewel, to part with it again so soon? I commit my cause to the justice of my judges, yet I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examined concerning my character, and if their testimony shall not overweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned, although I would pledge my salvation on my innocence. And then Elizabeth goes up to testify for her. I am she, the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered, or rather his sister. Elizabeth was adopted, but she referred to Mrs. Frankenstein as her aunt, and the Frankenstein children as her cousins. for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since, and even long before his birth. It may therefore be judged indecent in me to come forward on this occasion. But when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character. I am well acquainted with the accused. I have lived in the same house with her, at one time for 5, and at another for nearly 2 years. During all that period she appeared to me the most amiable and benevolent of human creatures. She nursed Madame Frankenstein, my aunt, in her last illness, with the greatest affection and care, and afterwards attended her own mother during a tedious illness in a manner that excited the admiration of all who knew her, after which she again lived in my uncle's house, where she was beloved by all the family. She was warmly attached to the child who is now dead, and acted towards him like a most affectionate mother. For my own part, I do not hesitate to say that, notwithstanding all the evidence produced against her, I believe and rely on her perfect innocence. She had no temptation for such an action. As to the bauble on which the chief proof rests, if she had earnestly desired it, I should have willingly given it to her. So much do I esteem and value her. The crowd doesn't seem to be swayed too much by it. Victor's still thinking, believing about the creature, believing that the creature did it. But he can't say anything about it, so he just rushes out of the court. He goes back again the next morning to learn that Justine has been condemned. Justice is pretty swift in Geneva in the 1700s. I mean, it can't have been a week or two, I think, since the boy's death, and they're already putting the person they believe to have done it to death. Even if there's no real evidence that she did it. Victor says the judges would rather that 10 innocents should suffer than that one guilty should escape. That is a hell of a principle to live by. And for some reason, it seems like someone tells him that Justine actually confessed to it. Yeah. We can probably infer that she was forced to confess. But let's keep reading to see if that was the case. Victor and Elizabeth go to visit her in prison. Justine says that she confessed so that she could obtain absolution. You know, you threaten somebody's soul, it's worse than threatening their life. They'll confess to all kinds of things, even things they know they didn't do. It's so twisted. Yeah, she goes on to say that she does not fear to die. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. I leave a sad and bitter world, and if you remember me and think of me as of one unjustly condemned, I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Leave from me, dear lady, to submit in patience to the will of heaven. They spend some more time with her in the prison. As Victor says, the poor sufferer tried to comfort others and herself. She indeed gained the resignation she desired. But I, the true murderer, felt the never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed of no hope or consolation. We stayed several hours with Justine, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth could tear herself away. "I wish," cried she, "that I were to die with you. I cannot live in this world of misery." Justine assumed an air of cheerfulness, while she with difficulty repressed her bitter tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said, in a voice of half-suppressed emotion, "Farewell, sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved and only friend. May heaven in its bounty bless and preserve you. May this be the last misfortune that you will ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so." And then it just goes on to say, "And on the morrow Justine died." Elizabeth's heartrending eloquence failed to move the judges from their settled conviction in the criminality of the saintly sufferer. My passionate and indignant appeals were lost upon them, and when I received their cold answers and heard the harsh, unfeeling reasoning of these men, my purposed avowal died away on my lips. Thus I might proclaim myself a madman, but not revoke the sentence passed upon my wretched victim. She perished on the scaffold as a murderess. Dying needlessly in the name of God. Some things never change, and some things are timeless enough to not need any more context. Torn by remorse, horror, and despair, I beheld those I loved spend vain sorrow upon the graves of William and Justine, the first hapless victims to my unhallowed arts. And then on to chapter 9. Nothing is more painful to the human mind than, after the feelings of having been worked up by a quick succession of events, the dead calmness of inaction and certainty which follows, and deprives the soul both of hope and fear. Justine died. She rested, and I was alive. The blood flowed freely in my veins, but a weight of despair and remorse pressed on my heart, which nothing could remove. And I was thinking just the other day about how psychic pain, mental and emotional pain seems to translate so quickly to physical illness, at least in Victor's case. It's like he has a conversion disorder or something. Either that or Geneva just has a whole lot of diseases running rampant in the 1700s. Sleep fled from my eyes. I wandered like an evil spirit, for I had committed deeds of mischief beyond description horrible, and more, much more, I persuaded myself was yet behind. Yet my heart overflowed with kindness and the love of virtue. I had begun life with benevolent intentions, and thirsted for the moment when I should put them in practice and make myself useful to my fellow beings. Now all was blasted. Instead of that serenity of conscience which allowed me to look back upon the past with self-satisfaction and from thence to gather promise of new hopes, I was seized by remorse and the sense of guilt, which hurried me away to a hell of intense tortures such as no language can describe. This state of mind preyed upon my health, which had perhaps never entirely recovered from the first shock it had sustained. I shunned the face of man. All sound of joy or complacency was torture to me. Solitude was my only consolation, deep, dark, death-like solitude. His father tries to talk him into putting on, if not a happy face, then certainly a less unhappy one. He says they owe it to the others. They go from Geneva to their house at Bellerive. Says that in Geneva they always close the city gates at a certain hour, which means you can't go walking. But now that they're in Bellerive, he can go out on the water at night when everybody else is asleep. Says that sometimes he's tempted to, when the boat is out in the middle of the lake, he's tempted to plunge into the silent lake, that the waters might close over me and my calamities forever. There's a footnote here, or end note rather. Says Frankenstein's thoughts were probably inspired by The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, published in 1774. The book in which Werther, the protagonist, becomes so despondent over an unrequited love that he kills himself, triggered a rash of suicides in the early 1800s. Young men were found dead dressed in Werther's distinctive clothing, and often carrying a copy of Goethe's book. That is awful. I can understand feeling a sense of social responsibility to not write anything like that happening again. But I was restrained when I thought of the heroic and suffering Elizabeth, whom I tenderly loved, and whose existence was bound up in mine. I thought also of my father and surviving brother. Should I, by my base desertion, leave them exposed and unprotected to the malice of the fiend whom I had let loose among them? At these moments I wept bitterly and wished that peace would revisit my mind, only that I might afford them consolation and happiness. But that could not be. Remorse extinguished every hope. I had been the author of unalterable evils, and I lived in daily fear lest the monster whom I had created should perpetrate some new wickedness. I had an obscure feeling that all was not over, and that he would still commit some signal crime, which by its enormity should almost efface the recollection of the past. There was always scope for fear, so long as anything I loved remained behind. He talks of wanting to find the creature and avenge the deaths of William and Justine. About his house being a house of mourning now. About how even the normally cheerful Elizabeth is sad all the time now. When I reflect, my dear cousin, said she, on the miserable death of Justine Moritz, I no longer see the world and its works as they before appeared to me. Before I looked upon the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books or heard from others as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote and more familiar to reason than to the imagination. But now misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters thirsting for each other's blood. Yet I am certainly unjust. Everybody believed that poor girl to be guilty, and if she could have committed the crime for which she suffered, assuredly she would have been the most depraved of human creatures. For the sake of a few jewels, to have murdered the son of her benefactor and friend, a child whom she had nursed from its birth and appeared to love as if it had been her own. I could not consent to the death of any human being, but certainly I should have thought such a creature unfit to remain in the society of men. But she was innocent. I know, I feel she was innocent. You are of the same opinion, and that confirms me. Alas, Victor, when falsehood can look so like the truth, who can assure themselves of certain happiness? feel as if I were walking on the edge of a precipice, towards which thousands are crowding and endeavoring to plunge me into the abyss. William and Justine were assassinated, and the murderer escapes. He walks around the world free, and perhaps respected. But even if I were condemned to suffer on the scaffold for the same crimes, I would not change places with such a wretch. I listened to this discourse with the extremest agony. I, not in deed but in effect, was the true murderer. Elizabeth read my anguish in my countenance, and kindly taking my hand said, "My dearest friend, you must calm yourself. These events have affected me, God knows how deeply. But I am not so wretched as you are. There is an expression of despair, and sometimes of revenge in your countenance that makes me tremble. Dear Victor, banish these dark passions. Remember the friends around you, who center all their hopes in you. Have we lost the power of rendering you happy? Even as she spoke, I drew near to her as if in terror, lest at that very moment the destroyer had been near to rob her of me. Thus not the tenderness of friendship, nor the beauty of earth, nor of heaven, could redeem my soul from such woe. The very accents of love were ineffectual. I was encompassed by a cloud which no beneficial influence could penetrate. The wounded deer dragging its fainting limbs to some untrodden brake, there to gaze upon the arrow which had pierced it and to die, was but a type of me. Talks about taking a walk, taking a little trip to a nearby valley that he visited a lot when he was a boy. It's actually looking like he took an even longer trip. He says, I performed the first part of my journey on horseback, and then a mule. It's the middle of August, nearly 2 months after the death of Justine. That miserable epoch from which I dated all my woe. It goes higher and higher up in the mountains. Apparently, these particular mountains, it says, Mary Shelley is influenced here by her husband's poem Mont Blanc. In the second stanza, he writes of the ravine of Arve, dark, deep ravine, where power and likeness of the Arve comes down from the ice gulfs that gird its secret throne. She doesn't use quite the same language, but she does seem to be a bit of a shout out to her husband's poem there. Describes more of his journey. Goes past abandoned cottages and even some ruined castles. Immense glaciers approached the road. I heard the rumbling thunder of the falling avalanche. I marked the smoke of its passage. Mont Blanc, the supreme and magnificent Mont Blanc, raised itself from the surrounding peaks, and its tremendous dome overlooked the valley. Seems the nostalgia of his boyhood travels there is starting to revive him a bit. The very winds whispered in soothing accents, and maternal nature bade me weep no more. Then again the kindly influence ceased to act. I found myself fettered again to grief, and indulging in all the misery of reflection. Then I spurred on my animal, striving so to forget the world, my fears, and more than all myself. Or in a more desperate fashion, I alighted and threw myself on the grass, weighed down by the horror and despair. At length, I arrived at the village of Chamonix. Exhaustion succeeded to the extreme fatigue, both of body and of mind, which I had endured. For a short space of time, I remained at the window, watching the pallid lightnings that played above Mont Blanc, and listened to the rushing of the Arve, which pursued its noisy way beneath. The same lulling sounds acted as a lullaby to my too keen sensations. When I placed my head upon my pillow, sleep crept over me. I felt it as it came, and blessed the giver of oblivion. I think that's enough for today. It's a particularly sad time in Victor's life. He lost his mother before he went to university, and while he was at university, he created the monster, and when he got home from university, it was when his younger brother had died, and his good friend was falsely accused and executed for his murder. Well, we'll see where things go from here next time. Thank you for watching. In the meantime, be sure to follow me on social media and read my own stories. They're available for all e-readers. Links will be in the description and on my various profiles. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you more later.